Mike and welcome to the workshop. This week I'm going to show you how you can make this simple workbench in just an afternoon's work for about less than 70 quid. Oh, and it's on wheels. Let's roll the intro. Hello and welcome to the workshop. It's not my workshop, it's my father's workshop because I take time off to come work. Such is life. As I said before, this assembly table is going to require no complex joinery. It's all just going to be screwed together. No fancy cutting. We're doing it all out of stock material. So what I have here is some 3x2 rough or 2x3 depending on where you're from, and you're going to need about 4 lengths 12 foot for this. And what you want to do, this is a very important tip, is go to wherever you're buying it and select it yourself and select straight timber, because there's no use trying to make a tabletop that's curved up and down, and these can nearly be circular. So just go, no one will bother you. They all know the story. You're looking for a straight piece. What you want to do is lay it down in front of you. Just look down the line of the edge. You'll be able to see if it's crooked or not. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to cut my legs. All my legs are going to be the same length. I'll have a measured drawing available if anyone wants it. Now I'm making mine on wheels. So if you're making yours, if I give a dimension here, you want to add about 100 mil to that. So all my legs are going to be 630, which will give me a 750 top. That's what I find is comfortable, but tables are suited to the person. So find a table you like working on and that's your height. So we'll go over to the chop saw. We're going to cut 4 at 630. I'll show you how we'll assemble the legs. And then we need to make 2 frames, one for the top and one for the bottom. And it's nearly built. So now I've discussed this before, but the best way to ensure accuracy when you're cutting multiples is to cut one and then mark all the rest of them off that. If you're using a tape, what tends to happen is you'll go slightly to one side or the other of the line on each cut and basically end up with pieces that are all slightly different lengths. So as you can see here, I cut my first piece and all the rest of them, then I'll use that, I'll strike a line, I'll cut to that line, and that pretty much guarantees my legs are going to be reasonably the same length. I had several of the legs already cut, so I'm moving on to the long pieces. And what I'm doing here is something I always recommend if you're working with construction lumber, is I'm starting off by putting on a square cut, because there's no guarantee that cut on the end of your board is 100% square, and you always want to be starting from a place of squareness. So in this bout I cut all the pieces for this at the one time. So I'm working on my longer pieces here, my long rails, and I got the same for the end rails and for the rails that form the shelf. So we'll move on to the next step now that all of these are cut and ready to go. Right, so the first step on our little production line is to make our 4 legs. Our legs are very simple. We're just going to come back down here a little bit. Our legs are very simple. All we're doing is screwing 2 pieces the same height in an L shape like this. This gives a nice strong leg. So very simply, just going to mark a line for my full width, and then drill some holes, file holes, for our screws. Now you don't need a bench to make this bench, in fact you're making it round, and as you go along you can keep building your bench. I do not as a rule
tend to glue together stuff I'm making for the workshop. It allows me to be able to take it apart and adjust it as I need. But I am putting serious screws into this. These are 4-inch screws, or 100mm for those of us in millimeter land. And all you do once you have one done is repeat it for however many legs you want to have. I've opted for the traditional 4 here.
So now we have our 4 legs. All we need to do is make a frame for these to sit in. That'll be our top skirt. And that is very simple. Same kind of construction. We have 2 long lengths here, 2 1750s, and 2 short lengths. Or simply going to make a frame. That it does.
Offcuts make extremely handy and easy marking gauges in this case. So I'm just marking my full width here, just to make sure I get the screws bang on the middle, because obviously I want this to be as strong as possible and have no breakout, and also that'll help guide me later on when I'll be screwing the legs in to make sure I don't put screws into screws. As you can see here, I have the 2 long skirting pieces together. I'm drilling through them at the same time, which means that I only have to sort of mark out once, then I can pull away the top one and finish off those screws. Those holes, pardon me. And with these 2 frames, both the top frame and the lower frame that form our shelf, I'll be using 100mm screws again. Make sure they ring and nice structurally sound. For attaching the legs when we're doing that, we'll use shorter screws because we don't want those to go through our material and burst out the other side.
Now we have our frame done. Time to put in our legs. So I'm putting the wide part across the width to fight against racking, because it's most likely to be along the long edge than the short edge. Now we're just going to put screws in on both sides here, to both sides of our leg, which will lock our leg in place.
As I mentioned a moment ago, when I'm drilling these holes, I'm keeping an eye out for where I put the screws to make sure the hole goes past where the screw is coming in. This is obviously particularly important because I've used such long screws. So just yourself, you'll get used to following the path of that screw by eye, and you should be able to avoid it when drilling through.
Now, just do that 4 more times.
I think I meant 3. On this side you can see clear what I mean. So on the long side it really doesn't matter, I'm just spacing the screws evenly. But on the short side I'm sighting along where those screws are going through to make sure that I put my new holes either above or below them, so the 2 screws don't connect in the middle and stop one another from functioning.
And right now, you could put a top on this and probably an okay bench. But I'm less than an hour in. But for a little bit of extra storage and a little bit of extra stability, I'm going to put a frame inside the legs here, which I'll then put a shelf on top of. In fact, I'm going to reuse the top of my own assembly bench for that. So we're going to get the bench off the bench, build that frame, and then we'll fit that secondary frame. And that's the bench done. Really, bar putting the top on.
And the assembly for this was identical to the top frame. And now comes the moment of truth. Will it fit? Oh, the suspense is killing me. And I already know how it turns out. Boy, is that satisfying.
Now, my bench, as I said, is going to get wheels. So I'm putting this frame on the very bottom, and the wheels will be screwed up into that. But if you're not putting yours on wheels, the easiest way to work this out is to get a few bits of scrap, put them under the corners of this frame, one on each corner. That then will raise your shelf up off the ground, and it'll be an even height. There's no need for any measuring or difficulties. But as I said, mine's going to hold me down. So let's take these back out. Again, here it's just a screw operation. Just screw in from the flat sides. That'll hold our shelf in place and should help keep everything nice and square.
This project is mostly drilling pilot holes and putting in screws. So finish off with that now when it's all assembled.
And there we go. Now, if you don't already have a bench, this will be the first use for this new bench, cutting the top. This bench here, it don't move. So, I'm going to leave this to one side and cut our top. I'm going to use chipboard for the top of my bench for two reasons. One, I already have this sheet and I've used it for cutting stuff. And two, I'm going to be using this bench as a cutting surface for like this track saw. And I want to pick a material that's not going to be too hard on the blade but is easily replaceable. That's why if you were making this a pure assembly bench, I would recommend splashing it on a sheet of melamine, which is a nice surface and easily wipe off glue and move things around. But the melamine, because it's a plastic and it's a higher density, does tend to wear away the blades a bit quicker. This is a nice middle ground for me. So I'm not using a full sheet here, so I'm just going to cut this lengthways and make it a bit shorter. Now of course you can cut this yourself with a handsaw or a normal circular saw, or get it cut for you. Getting the top cut shouldn't be a barrier to making yourself a very quick and simple bench. Little tip if you're cutting wide panels, want to make sure everything is square, go back to school. One of these little wooden T-squares that you pick up for 5 or 6 quid in most bookstores or art supplies are great for marking a square edge on the bottom of the wide panel. Just make sure it's square and use it the same way you would have used paper. Plus you're saving yourself a fortune, because a metal one of these from one of the tool suppliers will cost you probably 50 or 60 quid. Does the same job. Now to reintroduce our legs. Right, so now I have the frame positioned on the top where I want it to be, so nice and centered, and I'm just going to attach the top with simple angle brackets. But because I want this to be a sacrificial top that I'll be cutting into, I don't want there to be any screws sticking up that I could potentially hit if I cut too deep into the top or anything like that. So what I have is these pieces of scrap that I will be screwing and gluing along the inside perimeter and attaching the angle brackets to that. So then once the glue is dry, I can take out those screws. That'll hold everything in position and there's no screws going through my top that I could potentially hit.
And the last step then of this part of the making is to attach the casters. So I'm using long screws here and washers. The washers ensure that the screw head doesn't get pulled through the caster over time and make sure it stays exactly where I want it.
Now, that done, we have our first little project to do with our new bench, which is make the shelf. But for that we're going to need a bit of video magic.
And here we are, by magic in Galway, disassembling the old bench that many of you may have seen in my previous videos. This bench developed over many years. As you can see, when I take it apart, there's actually 2 tabletops on it, because I originally made it for a much smaller workshop. And then when all of that is done and it's cleaned up a bit, it's time to bring in the new bench. And, well, I was being lazy, so here it is with all the badness gone.
So here we are back in the workshop. I've even managed to tidy up a bit behind here. We're just going to reuse the old top here to make a shelf, and that's this done. It's very simple. We're just going to cut it to fit inside our legs. No difficult cuts here, so I'm just going to mark it. I'll cut it with a track saw, but of course you can cut it with a jigsaw or a handsaw or whatever you have.
In the end, I decided to just cut it by eye using a circular saw, which once you get used to it and lining it up isn't that difficult. So I start here by cutting it to length, and when I have that done, then I cut it to width. This can be a bit more tricky, keeping the saw straight all the way, but it does work out, and it fits pretty perfect. It needed a small amount of size 10 persuasion.
A couple of screws in that. We're good to go. Start loading her up.
I lost a video of me filling this up, but it's created so much space in the workshop. Everything that was under or around the bench is now under it, plus a hell of a lot more stuff. And even with that weight, and there's quite a lot of weight, it moves so slickly.
So that's it. Just need to load this up. Again, all told, this took me 3.5 hours between my dad's workshop and my own workshop, so it's definitely an easily manageable project of a weekend, and it'll make a big difference in your workshop. I know it'll make a huge difference in mine. Even the simple ability to move it around, have it on wheels, is going to be so beneficial to me because I have such a small workshop. It'll really maximize my space. If you like this video, like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and absolutely do try this at home. And absolutely do try this at home. Okay, maybe not this, but if I could take my weight, definitely well made. I'm a short fat Irishman, I am not in Starsky and Hutch. I'm a short fat Irishman, I am not in Starsky and Hutch.